What's up, everybody? It's good to have you here. I'm Emerson Lotzi alongside Jesse Cofield, our draft queen, hosting the show we call The Sweat, presented by DraftKings. We got some NHL, and we'll also put a fantasy spin on a few NFL storylines. But wait, there's more.
Lots and lots of basketball because the league returns to action tonight following its all-star break. So let's dive into some second-half storylines and their DFS and sportsbook impact with DraftKings contributors Gary and Thorne and Matt Meiselman, along with RotoWire's Nick Whalen.
All right, guys. This week, Nets GM Sean Marks said that it's possible both Ben Simmons and Kevin Durant could be ready to play next week. When we finally do see both guys on the court, what kind of impact will that have in the land of DFS, Garion?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty substantial. Obviously, you're going to have a situation where, Ben Simmons probably isn't going to be the highest usage player in the world, but, also if we factor in, Eric Adams coming out yesterday and saying that New York is in the process of removing its vaccination requirement, like Kyrie is probably going to be back in the mix on a daily basis too. So you're going to have the two tent poles of that offense, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, with usage rates hovering somewhere between 25 and 35%. You're going to have Ben Simmons on the court quite a bit. I mean, really, the biggest impact is just going to be the fact that Cam Thomas, Patty Mills, and Seth Curry are no longer going to be viable options in the 4K to 6K range. Other than that, I'm just kind of curious to see how Ben Simmons sort of augments this offense. I mean, he is someone who is obviously not the most adept offensive player in the half court. They've mentioned several times, they being the Nets, that they like how he profiles as someone who can attack in the transition and really implement that style of game into what they already have. So do they become a team that's like a top 5 pace team in the NBA? How much does he actually improve their defense? I mean, one of the easiest aspects of DFS for the first 4 months of the season has been, all right, is someone playing Brooklyn? They're probably going to have a pretty good game because they cannot defend anybody. So does Simmons make them a faster pace team, and does he make them a better defense, are kind of two of the big questions for me going forward.
All right, cool. Whalen, where do you sit on this, man? Like, evaluating the fantasy value of, like, Nets players not named, like, really Irving or Durant could be difficult here moving forward.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously, I think Simmons is the linchpin here. It depends what version of Ben Simmons we're getting. Are we getting a confident version of Ben Simmons? Is it going to take him, several weeks to kind of get back into the flow? I thought it was interesting that at practice earlier this week, Steve Nash said he thinks Kevin Durant is closer to returning to game action than Ben Simmons. Kevin Durant is injured with a knee injury. Ben Simmons has kind of been hanging out for most of the last year. So that tells me that maybe Ben Simmons is not in the greatest shape. Maybe there's going to be some kind of basketball reconditioning. I mean, even guys like us who play pickup basketball, if you don't play for a while, it takes you, several games, several days to kind of feel back, get that comfortability back. And obviously that's exacerbated when you're on an NBA stage. So I've been kind of saying all along since they made this trade, I don't necessarily trust that Ben Simmons is just going to switch teams and all of a sudden be back to, first team all defense, great passer, triple-double threat. I think it's going to take some time. So, how that affects the guys around him, we'll see. And it's also worth noting that, there were some pretty interesting comments from New York City Mayor Eric Adams yesterday, essentially implying that vaccine mandate will likely be lifted at some point in the next month. So maybe that doesn't really have that much of an effect with the regular season since there's only 7 weeks left. But I think we're going to get to a point where Kyrie Irving is going to end up being a full-time player for this Nets team.
Yeah, Maddie, New York does plan to start phasing out its vaccine mandate here in the coming weeks. But another impact with these two dudes, when they eventually return to the floor, several role players could see their production drop.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty game by game for me, though, because I think this is kind of to what these guys have been talking about. We don't know how healthy Ben Simmons is. Like, is he going to play every game? Is Kyrie Irving going to still get rest games? Kevin Durant, I think, almost certainly will sit some games during the duration of the season because just the number of injury concerns he's had over the last 3 or 4 years. So on the nights where all of these guys are in, they're not going to be a very interesting team from a DFS perspective. They just have too many names and too many guys to take shots. But on the other nights, assuming that the prices on the role players come down as a result of this, on the other nights where you get, let's say, Kevin Durant resting, then Seth Curry, Patty Mills, James Johnson, whoever else, these guys are going to be a lot more appealing than even they are currently because the prices are going to go a lot lower. So it's going to be a very different Nets situation, very different analysis each game, because I think the situations are just going to be very different night over night.
All right, guys, Suns point guard Chris Paul is expected to miss 6 to 8 weeks with a fracture on his right thumb. So, what's the trickle-down effect of Paul's absence, either in DFS or Sportsbook, Nick? I mean, obviously, with Paul out, Devin Booker going to be leaned on more here.
Yeah, I mean, the Suns obviously have leaned extremely heavily on Chris Paul since he arrived. He's missed, I think, 2 games in a Suns uniform, and I think both of those were for rest purposes last season. So, I mean, this is a guy that was missing 20-plus games seemingly every year in the middle of his prime, and all of a sudden he's in his late 30s, and he becomes this Iron Man. So, he's single-handedly dragged this team from a 35-win team to the best team in the league. There's going to be an adjustment period no matter what. In terms of depth, they kind of a good thing, I guess, that they picked up a guy like Aaron Holiday at the deadline. Not that that's going to be a huge difference maker, but Cameron Payne still not fully recovered from his injury. He hasn't played in several months. So we might see Aaron Holiday start in their first game after the break. You still have Elfrid Payton, not an option that you're super excited about. Both Holiday and Payton could be interesting DFS plays in the short term. But ultimately, I think we see more of Devin Booker as the primary playmaker. And keep in mind that before Chris Paul arrived, Devin Booker essentially functioned as the Phoenix Suns point guard for almost a full season back in 2019-20. And in that season, he played 70 games. He averaged 36 minutes a game, 6.5 assists per game. And even in the season before that, when they started experimenting with Booker at point guard, he was almost at 7 assists per game. So in terms of individual production, I'm not in love with playing Cam Payne in DFS, playing Aaron Holiday, playing Elfrid Payton. I think all those guys have pretty low ceilings. I think this is going to be pretty big, though, for Devin Booker's value. As long as he can stay healthy going forward, I think he's the guy that gets the biggest boost.
Matt, when Paul is on the floor, Phoenix averages 115.9 points per 100 possessions. Without him, that number drops to 104.9. I mean, you can't really overstate how big of a loss this is.
Yeah, it's definitely a big loss. Although I think there's some noise to the stats like that. For instance, when Paul's not on the court, it's less likely that the game is close. They may just be playing garbage time for a lot of those minutes. And then also it's definitely more of a problem this year than it's been in years past because Cameron Payne's been injured. That's really the key here for me. If Payne comes back, I'm not as worried about Chris Paul. That drop off from Paul all the way down to Elfrid Payton and Aaron Holiday, I think is huge. And I think the 10 points less per 100 possessions, that is probably a realistic assessment of what might happen. But with Cameron Payne playing, I think we see him kind of bridge that gap, and then it'll be just a small drop off, but not a major one. But Devin Booker, yeah, I think this is where we're going to see the biggest change with the Suns. He's averaging 4.5 assists per game this year. His over-under for assists tonight is 6.5 with the over at -150. We're essentially expecting 2.5 to 3 more assists out of Booker over his season average just because Paul's not there. There's not really anything else different about the Suns aside from that. So I think he functionally will be this team's point guard. I think even if Aaron Holiday is a starter, Holiday's probably the shooting guard. So we may see Booker actually score less, pass more, be double-teamed more. It'll create a different dynamic with the Suns. But as long as Cameron Payne can get back out there in the next week or two, I don't think it affects the Suns too much in the standings. I think it's going to affect the way that their production is spread out game to game.
Gary, and talk to me.
Yeah, just going to kind of echo what these guys were saying. I mean, you've got a situation where I guess in the immediate future, tonight, you can use Aaron Holiday because he's $3,700 and he's probably going to play 25 to 30 minutes because Cameron Payne is unavailable. But when Cameron Payne comes back, Payne is first and foremost probably going to be the immediate replacement in the starting lineup for Chris Paul as soon as he's ready. But you're going to start seeing that reflected in their price points. I think whether it's Holiday, whether it's Payne, they're going to get up to that high 4K, low 5K range. And they're just not going to be all that enticing a DFS option on a night-to-night basis because Devin Booker is going to be the point guard. I mean, one of the biggest reasons Devin Booker took a massive hit in his season-long value as soon as the Suns acquired Chris Paul was, as these guys talked about, he went from someone who was, hovering around a 34 to 35% assist rate, and that's been down around 20% playing alongside Paul these last 2 seasons. This is someone who has been amazing across his last 18 games. And in those 18 games, when the possessions and minutes he's played without Chris Paul, he's got a 38% usage rate and he's averaging 1.4 DraftKings points per minute. So this is now just Devin Booker's world. There really isn't like a trickle-down effect that entices me in DFS. It's just Devin Booker is now going to take on much more of a role than his already substantial role for Phoenix. So that's really the 1A and 1B effect here.
And then, guys, in the city of brotherly love here, we should see the debut of James Harden sometime soon. How do you think his addition is going to impact Embiid on the floor, though, Matt?
I think it could be pretty significant. Embiid is the clear favorite right now for MVP at plus 130, but his usage has to drop with James Harden there. There's just no way he can continue to shoot as much as he's been shooting with the addition of someone like Harden. I mean, I think the Sixers will try to stagger the minutes and get it so that one of them is on the court at all times and try to space them out as much as possible. But I don't see this being a two-man game type of combination where James Harden and Joel Embiid are running pick and rolls and Harden is throwing him alley-oops and all. Maybe that happens once every so often, but these are two isolation type players. And I think any possession where James Harden is shooting, Joel Embiid is probably kind of just standing and watching or trying to fight for a rebound. Like, we're not going to see too much synergy between these two players. I think Philly will be fine despite that. These are two of the best one-on-one basketball players in the NBA. But if Embiid's stats start to come down, which I think they will, we're going to see more talk about Nicola Jokage, who I think is rightfully deserving of the MVP now. He's just, I think, the best player in the league from a value perspective. Doesn't have the narrative of Embiid, but if Embiid's production starts to fall just due to having less shot attempts, I think we may see Jokic actually pass him in the MVP race at some point.
Yeah, Gary, and the superstar big man averaging a league-high 29.4 points per game here to go with north of 10 rebounds, north of 4 assists. How do you think this will affect his MVP candidacy?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of talked about this yesterday when we were just talking about who we thought was going to win MVP, who had the best odds. And, you know, I'll echo what Matt was saying. I think Jokic is the deserving MVP right now. But when we talk about Embiid's production, I guess it should be said that he's at such a high level that when there is going to be a drop-off, because there has to be, this is someone whose usage rate is about 41% since the beginning of January, which is absurd. And you even mentioned, Emerson, the assist numbers. I mean, a lot of that is just Embiid getting the ball in the post and being double or triple teamed and being able to find a wide open shooter virtually anywhere on the court. That's going to happen just less now based on the fact that James Harden is going to be standing on the other side of the court, and Harden's going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit more often than anyone else, you know, your Tyrese Maxeys of the world. So this is going to affect his overall numbers, but it is a high place to have some slippage. So I don't think suddenly he's going to be averaging like 20 and 7. He's still going to have some pretty impressive numbers. And I think it was Nick who pointed this out yesterday. For as much drop-off in terms of his MVP as you might see from the raw statistical side of things, if the Sixers just reel off like 11 straight wins and become the number 1 seed in the East, which is, you know, it's still very much up for grabs, that could definitely be, along with just being like the team everyone is going to be watching the last 2 months of the season, that really could help his MVP odds in the long run.
All right, Nick, he's joining a team run by the man who constructed that Rockets uber-efficient offense, too. He's back with Daryl Morey right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of going to echo what Darian said and what I said yesterday, which is I think Embiid's numbers are going to drop by default. You're bringing in one of the highest usage players in NBA history in James Harden. And like Matt said, you know, I think in theory, you're like, oh, yeah, they'll just run pick and roll and nobody will be able to stop it. That's not really what Joel Embiid does. Like, he still wants to do a lot of isolation. You know, he doesn't want to just turn into, you know, like a souped up version of Clint Capella. That's not who Joel Embiid is. So I think it could be a little clunky at first, but, you know, ultimately, if Joel Embiid's going to win the MVP award, his numbers either have to sustain, which in my opinion is somewhat unlikely. I think he can do 90%, 85% of what he's doing right now, but it has to be offset by the Sixers being a really good team, because I think part of the narrative, or part of the reason that Joel Embiid is ahead of Nikola Jokic right now is there's this thought that, like, oh, he's on a vastly better team. You know, Philly's 3rd in the East, Denver's all the way down at 6th in the West. I mean, they're only separated by what, like 2 games in the standings? Philly's 35 and 23, Denver 33 and 25. So it's not like there's this huge gap here. So, you know, if Philly struggles a little bit to integrate Harden and Denver goes on a run and you can kind of throw out the records and that's no longer a part of it, I think that ultimately ends up favoring Jokic. Although the one thing we haven't mentioned is that eventually Jamal Murray, at some point in the next month, it sounds like, is going to be back on the floor for Denver. I don't think that's going to have as much of an impact as James Harden joining the 76ers, but still something to keep in mind that probably takes at least a little bit of usage away from Nikola Jokic.
All right, guys, quickly on this last one. The Lakers come out of the break 27-31, sitting in 9th place in the West. Anthony Davis going to be out at least a month with a foot injury. Russell Westbrook continuously riding the bench. LeBron doing everything he can, right? Averaging a career-high 29 points per game. But this team is in danger of missing the playoffs, and you can bet on that right now on the DK Sportsbook. Actually, -135 to miss, +105 to make it. Which one would you bet on right now, Gary? And LeBron has only missed the playoffs 3 times in his career.
Damn.
I'm going to bet on him to make it, and it's simply because the Lakers are going to get to the play-in. Like, they're on an island right now. They are 6 games back of the 6th seed, but they've got a pretty comfy cushion on the 10 seed, considering, like, the team currently in the 10 spot doesn't want to be there and told their best player yesterday, hey, you're hurt. Trust us. You're hurt. So they're probably going to end up having, like, the 2 one-game playoffs. The first one's going to be against Sacramento. And the second one, yeah, maybe it's against, like, Minnesota, who's frisky. Maybe it is against the Clippers, who have got one of their 2-star players back. But at the end of the day, if you're telling me one side has LeBron James and probably a healthy Anthony Davis by that point, I'm just going to take that team in a one-game playoff, regardless of where that game is taking place. So I think they end up making the playoffs. They don't make a lot of noise once they get into it, but they do win the play-in.
Nick, which side are you on?
I'm out on this Lakers team. I can't do it anymore. I don't think they make it. I think, who knows which of the big 3 is even going to be available at that point. Anthony Davis is basically 50-50 to make it through any game that he starts at this point. I don't see some sort of miraculous turnaround chemistry-wise happening over these last 24 games. By that point, the Clippers will likely have Paul George back. Maybe they would have Kawhi Leonard back. So if that's the case and that's the matchup to get in, I think the Clippers win that. And even Minnesota. I mean, right now, you look at that Minnesota roster, top to bottom. Yeah, the Lakers maybe have the 2 best players when Davis and LeBron are healthy in that series, but Minnesota much, much deeper. One thing that I think has flown under the radar with the Lakers is, not only has Davis been injured, Westbrook has struggled, but pretty much every single role player for them has been terrible. And, other teams are just so much deeper when you look at like the 3 through 10 positions. So maybe LeBron and Davis can carry the Lakers in a one-game playoff, but man, right now it's really hard to put faith in this team. So I'll say they miss.
Matt, in or out on the Lakers?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to know at this point I'm going out on the Lakers still. This has been my favorite question to answer for basically the entire season. I think it's just too narrow of a path for them to get in. They need everything to go right. First of all, they need to win most likely 2 play-in games in a row. The first of the 2 may be against an inferior opponent like the Pelicans or the Spurs or the Kings, or maybe the Blazers, who may not have Yusuf Nurkic still at that point. But they have to win 2 of those, and the second one is likely Minnesota or the LA Clippers with Paul George. Both of those are better teams than the healthy Lakers. But then the other concern is Anthony Davis is hurt. LeBron James has been dealing with injuries all season. The idea that we can just guarantee that both of them will be healthy at that point, like, that just seems crazy to me. It may even be more likely than not that one of them is still out at that point. And also with just how many more minutes and how much more usage LeBron is going to have while Davis is out. I mean, if there's something that can increase LeBron's injury risk in the near future, it's not having Anthony Davis there to take off some of that burden. And if LeBron sees Russell Westbrook start to take on more of the offense and do poorly, LeBron's just not going to give him the ball as much and try to just do more himself. The chances of LeBron and Davis both staying healthy to me are nowhere near 100%. So for all of those reasons, just something probably goes wrong for this team. And yeah, I think even at -130, -135, whatever it is now, I still would bet them not to make the playoffs.
I do like how you guys are both basically like, oh, LeBron and AD probably won't be there. But yeah, Paul George, just a beacon of health. Paul George is definitely going to be playing in the game.
That's a fair point. But the Clippers without him may be better than the Lakers without their guys. Like, I still think they have other players that are good. The Lakers do not.
No, they do not.
All right, guys, we're going to have you back later in this show. Do not worry, to discuss tonight's 7-game slate around the NBA. Right after Paul will join us to help you build your NHL lineups, and we'll talk some hockey bets as well.
Welcome back to this Friday Eve edition of The Sweat. I'm Jesse, he's Emerson, and we've got RotoWire senior hockey writer Paul Bruno here for Paul's Puck Picks. So, 8-game NHL slate coming our way this evening. Paul, we need you to give us your DFS and sportsbook plays.
All right, let's start with the centers here, dude. Austin Matthews leading the position in salary, $9,300, coming off a 3-point night against Columbus. Then you have Alexander Barkov going up against that same Blue Jackets team Matthews just torched. So are you looking at one of these two guys as your favorite play up the middle tonight?
No, there's three cheaper ones that make a little more sense. They got better matchups. Sidney Crosby, for instance, versus the Devils, they're going to throw out a third-string goalie against him, and he's been on fire. 36 shots on goal and 13 points his last 10 outings. Patrice Bergeron reunited with his usual partners and suspects on the top line in Boston. They're facing Seattle in Seattle. The Bruins are rolling. The Kraken are not. Teams are headed in opposite directions, so take the Bruins big line, maybe as a whole, but certainly Bergeron for sure. And then Elias Lindholm, priced cheaper than these two guys, still centering the hottest line in hockey, $6,900 his price tag, and he too gets a pretty nice matchup tonight against the Canucks, who've been inconsistent over the last 7 games.
All right, moving over to the wingers, Brad Marchand returns from his 6-game suspension to help the Bruins on the road in Seattle. He's going to be well rested, reunited with Patrice Bergeron on Boston's top line. So is he worth considering on the wing tonight?
Sure he is, Jesse, and I think his partner on the other side is even more of a safe bet. Pasternak back to the top line. He thrived on the second unit because he was getting exposure on their power play too. Now that he's back with the big boys, he's going to be happier, and a happy Pasternak is possibly an even more productive one. So get the mismatch opportunity in Seattle for sure. Jake Gensel riding shotgun with Sidney Crosby, priced at $7,600. That's $800 less than Pasternak for a guy who's just about as hot. 37 shots on goal in his last 10 games. They get that nice matchup against New Jersey. And finally, Jonathan Huberdeau, cheaper than both these guys, despite the fact he's right near the top of the NHL scoring list. 17 points and 29 shots on goal in his last 10 games. Very favorable matchup against Columbus, who's going to field their third-string goalie as well.
All right, dude, I'm looking at it here. We got a lot of studs on the blue line at $6,000 and up. So Yossi, Letang, Ekblad, like all with great matchups here. Should people be looking to pay up on defense?
Well, Emerson, you know that I kind of go lower on the board for defensemen, but tonight you made the case. There are 3 studs that have great matchups. Chris Letang, $7,000 against New Jersey. He's pouring it in at a point per game pace, and this should be a very one-sided matchup. Aaron Ekblad having a great season, best bet maybe among the top flight defenders, $6,800 tonight for a guy who's just doing everything at both ends of the ice. He's averaging 15-plus points in DK play for the last 10 games, so well worth that price tag. And I'm going to take a guy that's not really as hot as these guys, but maybe gets at least as good a matchup in Charlie Mcavoy. Only 3 points in his last 10 outings. That's not good for a guy who plays power play minutes here. $6,200. I think he gets off the mat, though, and starts to produce big time with this tasty one against Seattle.
All right, Paul, we talked a lot about people you might be paying up for, but who's someone that you're going to target as a value play tonight?
Well, Michael Bunting in Toronto has been on fire, and he's riding shotgun with Marner and Matthews and thriving in that role, all of a sudden leading all rookie goal scorers and really producing of late. And he likes the going when it gets tough. It's going to be a nasty game against Minnesota, but that's when he shines the most. So I expect him to thrive tonight and pay off for the $4,900 price tag. Elias Pettersson, I'm still surprised, Jesse, that he's only $4,200, considering that he's really found his offensive game, and he reminds me of the dynamic player that burst onto the league not so long ago. So I like him, even though he's got a tough matchup tonight at that low price tag. And I like Carter Verhaeghe on the right wing on Florida's top line. They're the highest scoring team in hockey, and he's been a big part of it. And $4,000, sign me up.
All right, dude, I'm looking at it. Once again, 8 games to choose from tonight on the DK Sportsbook. Let's go there. What's your favorite bet tonight?
Well, you know I like the alternate goal total, so that's where I start and finish with 2 easy ones tonight. I think take the over on the alt line for Boston and Seattle. The Bruins are going to run up a score here, so I go as high as over 6.5 for the plus 140 payoff. And I think the same play arrives and applies in New Jersey's trip to San Jose, where the offenses are both pretty good and the defense is not so much. So I'm saying go over 6.5 to get that 155 payoff.
Paul, we're going to dive into the trade deadline a little more as we get closer, but it's now less than a month away. Rumors are already flying around across the league about who's going where. So we want to get your take on where some of the most impactful fantasy players, might land. So give us your best prediction of where these guys will be playing post-trade deadline. So how about Claude Giroux?
I think Colorado's the one that's making noise there. It makes sense to throw him in on the second line there.
All right, dude. Marc-Andre Fleury, been linked to Washington and Colorado.
Yeah, and you can throw Edmonton in the mix. They desperately need a goalie. And how about Vegas? There's rumors that the Knights may or may not get Robin Lehner back. There's conflicting reports, but I'm going to go with RotoWire's report that says he might be back in a week. So fade that and maybe look for him to wind up in Washington or Edmonton as a result.
How about JT Miller?
Well, he's been linked to the Maple Leafs and Colorado as well, and I think a return to the Rangers is possible. All three teams have a lot of cap space to fit him in, and he's going to be highly sought after. So they're going to have to pay a ransom to get this guy, but he's going to be well worth it, I think, wherever he winds up.
Jacob Chikrin, linked to Florida, LA, Boston, Toronto. Hey, come on.
Top defenders are really in demand at the trade deadline. I'm going to say New York Rangers, LA Kings, and Boston Bruins, all with needs on the back end, are going to be vying for his services.
All right, finally, John Klingberg, what do we think?
Carolina, Toronto, or Boston. I think Boston's definitely on the lookout for defensemen. You mentioned the Leafs as well, so those are the top two contenders, I think.
All righty, dude. That was excellent work. Appreciate you, Paul. We will talk to you later this week. We're turning our attention to the hardwood next because basketball is back. We are back, and so is basketball. Say hello to DraftKings contributors Gary and Thorne, Matt Meiselman, along with RotoWire's Nick Whalen. Fellas, very, very simple stuff here. We want your favorite DFS and sportsbook plays on tonight's 7-game NBA slate.
All right, Nicola Jokage highlights the slate going up against Sacramento. He's going to cost you almost $2K more than the next available player. So, Gary, and when you're looking at all these high-priced dudes here, like, who are you most confident in paying up for?
I mean, you can never go wrong with Jokic. I think we talked a lot about Devin Booker in the first segment. I think tonight is going to be one of the final nights for a while. You see him below 9K, so there's a buying window there. I also like Trae Young a lot. I mean, this is a game against the Bulls where we kept waiting and waiting and waiting, not only for, the Bulls' major offensive pieces with defensive question marks, but, losing Alex Caruso, losing Ball. How long would it take for us to see the defensive slippage? And it has definitely happened across the last 15 games. They're giving up over 116 points per 100 possessions in that span of time. They are also allowing the most opponent assists per 36 minutes of any Eastern Conference team within that span of time. It just seems like the perfect environment for someone like Trae Young, who's gone over 50 DraftKings points in 6 of his last 9 games. So there's a lot of very viable options up above 9K and even slightly below 9K if you want to include Booker, but I think Trae Young might actually be my favorite.
All right, who are you looking at, Matt?
Looking at Jokic, but I really don't think you can go wrong with any of these guys. I mean, Devin Booker for sure is the most underpriced. He's basically 8,800 for him kind of makes sense if Chris Paul were playing. Without Paul, like we talked about before, Booker's going to just have to do more for the offense. His assists are going to go up. His shot attempts probably go up. I think his efficiency probably drops a bit, but overall fantasy production has to go up for Booker. So if you can afford Jokic, I think it's Jokic, but my favorite guy in this range, I think, just has to be Booker. Yes, he's going to be chalk, so if you want to pivot to someone like Trae Young, I do think that's a good call. But I think the pricing is low enough on Booker to the point where you just say, this is the chalk that I'm going to play. I'll make a different choice elsewhere.
All right, Nick, who do you like paying up for?
Yeah, Booker's my guy, 8,800. But like Matt said, ownership's going to be high. I think everybody kind of knows what to expect, which we touched on the last NBA segment. I mean, DeMar DeRozan, the price is way up there at this point, $10,700. But last 8 games, before the break. He was at 37.6 points, 5.6 rebounds, 5.8 assists, and 58% from the field. The usage rate, sky high. Players, when they get on a streak like that, he's got 8 straight games of at least 30 points. You tend to try to ride it out, see how long you could go. So I think he's going to come out firing on the other side of the break here. The Bulls do get Levine back. However, that worries me a little bit. But I think I'm still going to have some exposure to DeRozan in at least a few lineups. Jared Allen, not exactly somebody you're paying up for, but 7,600 for a guy who, the Cavs are not going to have their top 2 scoring guards in Garland and Levert tonight. So I think 7,600 is a really good price for him as a building block. And then even Jason Tatum at 9,700, I do worry about blowout potential. And last time the Celtics played the Nets, I believe they got out to a 28-2 start in that game. This version of the Nets should be a little more competent, but might not be a night where Jason Tatum is playing 39 minutes.
Alrighty. From the high-priced guys to someone who will help you save some dough. Matt, who is your favorite value play on this slate?
I really don't want to pick Rajon Rondo, so I'm just going to go somewhere else. I just don't.
Well, is he on a national game? Is it a nationally televised game? He's a different guy on that
like
stage.
Cavs,
Okay. Yeah, then
Cavs Pistons. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
think
I would fade him. I'd fade him.
Yeah, let's fade him. So I'll pick somebody else. I'll go with another veteran, though, in James Johnson. Johnson didn't start the last time the Nets played the Celtics, actually, but he came off the bench and was basically the Nets' best player in that game. He was the primary ball handler off the bench. And my hunch is that the Nets saw how that worked, and either one will go back to that again, just the same setup where they let Johnson be the second unit guy, or two, they just move him into the starting lineup for this game and go off that strong production that he's had and just try to get him out there, and maybe they can get a different outcome against Boston early in the game, because the Nets were down 26 points before Johnson even stepped on the court, which is just a whole other thing. Just an insane game that one was. So if the Nets are going to have a different level of success here, maybe they decide that it's going to be because Johnson plays more. But this is still a very shorthanded team. He's only $3,500, so you don't really need a lot here to sell him. A lot of these Nets guys will look like pretty good values, especially the cheaper ones. So I think James Johnson's a good call, but there are a bunch of players on this slate in the 3 to 4K range that are worth considering. So I just think he might be a little more under the radar than someone like Rondo or Trendon Watford on the Blazers or a couple other guys.
All right, Nick, who are you considering then? Because Matt says there's a bunch of guys in that 3 to 4K range.
There sure are. The Nets kind of scare me a little bit just because, so many guys have been banged up and injured, over the last few weeks that I feel like we don't still have a great grasp on who's actually in the rotation night to night. So I think that's a stay away from me. Maybe I'll get burned there, but I'm happy to go with Rondo. I know it's not national TV. I know it's Cleveland-Detroit, like one of the most historically unappealing matchups of the last 15 years, but you're getting Rondo at $3,900. He has 2 40-plus DraftKings points games in the Cavs' handful of games before the break when Darius Garland was missing time with that lower back. Now we have no Garland and no Levert. So Rondo's viable. I think Jetty Osman at 4,000, also very much viable. And then I'm also turning my attention to the Portland Trailblazers, who in the first segment, Garion noted I don't know what Yusuf Nurkic was doing over the All-Star break where he apparently tore plantar fascia in his foot. I think that is a completely illegitimate injury. They really have no depth at center. They don't have another true center on the roster right now. I think at some point they'll either bring in a 10-day or call someone up from the G League just for depth purposes. But for the time being, Trendon Watford is going to play. Basically, he's going to play until he fouls out, I think, tonight. And he's at 3,400. You could even try Greg Brown at 3,200, and guys like Justice Winslow, Josh Hart, the salaries are a little higher, but I think they're still great values.
Garion, where do you sit here on a value play, dude?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting slate because there are so many value opportunities opened up because of injury, because of guys not playing, that I think, for as strange as it is to say that someone might go under the radar in the game that has by far the highest total of the slate, you look at Minnesota and there's no like glaring injury issue that would lead you to think someone's going to get expanded minutes or someone's going to have a huge role that they normally wouldn't have. But Jayden McDaniels' price point is still just very strange to me. He's $3,600. When you go back to January 27th, Jayden McDaniels is playing the 4th most minutes per game of any member of the Timberwolves, trailing the exact 3 guys you think he would be trailing. He's actually played more than 30 minutes in 4 of his past 5 games. even though he's been sort of jumping back and forth between the starting lineup, going back to the bench, being the sixth man, it doesn't really affect his role at the end of the day. He still plays between 23 to 30 minutes seemingly every single night for the Timberwolves. And in what could be a very up-tempo, very high-scoring matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies, I just think you're looking at like a 6x, 7x floor with someone like McDaniels.
All right, to the sportsbook we go. Suns are the biggest favorites on the board tonight going up against the Thunder. Meanwhile, that game Garion just mentioned, Grizzlies and T-Wolves are the closest matchup. So are you targeting either of those games for a bet against the spread, or are you looking elsewhere, Garion?
I'll just bet Boston. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't really have all that much to do with the 28-2 thing. But they are an 8-point favorite here across their last 15 games. I know like a couple big blowouts, particularly this game against the Nets. Oh, it's 9 now. I'll still bet Boston. It's fine. They're outscoring opponents by 16.6 points per 100 possessions their last 15 games. Like, it's an absurd number. Their defense has been incredible, and it's been incredible against good teams. And right now, the Nets, like, they're missing all of their offensive firepower. The Nets, even just in general, have only covered 6 of their last 26 home games against the spread. I'm just going to take Boston blindly here. Even if it gets up to like 10, I don't care. I'll just bet the Celtics.
All right, Nick, where are you looking?
That's the game I have highlighted as well. And here goes Gary. And I mean, the line's moving live as he's talking, up to -9. You know, the Nets reeled off a couple wins before the break when they were shorthanded. And I feel like that built up like a little bit of unneeded goodwill. And of course, then they finish out their first half schedule by getting smacked around by the Washington Wizards, who are not a very good team. So honestly, I think this number could be a little bit higher. I mean, Garion laid out a pretty compelling case. Boston has been as hot as any team in the league, playing really, really well, really dating back to the last month and a half, 2 months. And Brooklyn's just really shorthanded. They just kind of need to limp through this period until at least one of Kevin Durant or Ben Simmons or Kyrie Irving, you know, becomes a full-time player. But as of right now, I mean, this is going to be a Brooklyn team that's a shell of itself. I also kind of like OKC to cover a big number. They're +10 against Phoenix tonight. They do get SGA back. Josh Giddey played really well before the break, closed with 3 straight triple-doubles. And, of course, as we've talked about at length, no Chris Paul for the Suns. So I think Phoenix wins that game. I think long-term they're fine, but pretty big adjustment playing their first game all season without Chris Paul.
All right, Matt, take us home. What do you think?
So I've been talking about the Denver Nuggets as a dark horse finals contender, but that is entirely dependent on at least Jamal Murray coming back and then potentially Michael Porter Jr. coming back. As it stands, I think Denver is a pretty average team. Like, really what's happening with that analysis is I think Murray is just so much better than Bryn Forbes, Austin Rivers, the guys that are filling in for him. Murray's probably like a borderline all-star when he's at his best, but just the guys he would be replacing, I think, are well below average players. And those are the guys Denver has to give minutes to right now. So I really like the Kings on the other side of this game. I actually don't think there's a massive divide in total skill between these two teams. Like, yes, Jokic is the best player on the floor. It's not debatable. It's not close basically anytime Jokic is playing in a game. But the rest of the Denver Nuggets, I just think, fall off so fast. And Sacramento actually is a pretty deep team right now. I think they're pretty well balanced, and they traded Tyrese Halliburton, which I think I understand why people are critical of that. But for this season, if we're just talking about this year, I do think they got better with Domantas Sabonis. Jeremy Lamb, I think, is a decent player too. Davion Mitchell is returning from a hand injury for this game. The Kings are 4.5-point underdogs. I think this is much closer to a coin flip. So getting those points at home, I think, is really good value here.
All right, that Grizzlies-Timberwolves game has one of the highest totals of the season at a whopping 240. Gary, and it's not like the 244.5, whatever game that was last week we were talking about, but are you touching this one when it comes to betting a game total, or do you have your eye on another one?
Yeah, I'm once again definitely guaranteeing this game goes.
That was Hornets-Wolves, that's what it was. It was Hornets-Wolves last week.
Yeah, the Wolves play some high-scoring games. I'm going to go elsewhere. I'm going to go back to that Nuggets-Kings game. The Nuggets have kind of changed their identity. At least they were in the process of changing their identity before the All-Star break. It'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out tonight. But we think of the Nuggets as this plodding, slow-paced team because that's what they have tended to be the last 2.5 seasons. They were a top 10 pace team across their final 5 games. So I'm just sort of intrigued by that number. We know the Kings are a fast-paced team. They are also top 10. They're actually top 5 across their last 5 games. So if you've got 2 top 10 pace teams and 2 teams that aren't exactly like great defensive squads either going up against each other in this contest tonight, I think it probably goes over. I mean, the last 5 times these 2 teams have met, they've gone over the number. The Kings are 6-1 to the over in their last 7 games overall. So if the Nuggets are going to supply a little up-tempo pace here, I think this one goes over pretty easily.
Matt, do you think it goes over pretty easily?
I don't know. I mean, it's a high number.
You were a coward last week with 244 and a half,
true.
bud.
It covered by 1 point.
It doesn't matter. It covered.
In overtime.
In overtime, 1 point. I'm looking
covered.
at an under on a different game. We got that news that Darius, Garland, and Charis Levert are out for the Cavs, and the total only dropped from 210.5 to 208.5. To me, like, that should be a 5-point drop for those 2 players not being there, especially Garland. But the key is neither of those players is a good defender, Garland or Levert. So taking them both off the court is going to make the Cavs offense worse, and it's also going to make the Pistons offense worse. I think it makes the game slower, especially if we get Cedi Osman playing point guard. Brandon Goodwin is probably the best defensive point guard on the Cavs. He should be in the rotation at this point. But Rondo, I think, has to slow the game down relative to what Garland and Levert would have done. And Lauri Markkanen's also back, which you would say, yeah, Markkanen's a good offensive player. That probably helps the game go over. But I think the Cavs just have to play bigger lineups because of him. They have Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, Kevin Love, Lauri Markkanen, Dean Wade plays minutes in the front court, Isaac Okoro. Like, they're going to have 3 bigs essentially on the court at all times now. So even though Markkanen is a good offensive player, I think we just see a different dynamic with the team where they just only have 1 or 2 guards on the court at any given moment, and they're playing more big men, which is just going to mean a slower game. So I still like the under here, even though it's fallen to 208.5.
Nick, you like this whopping 240-point total here between the Grizz and Wolves? You want another one?
Well, I mean, as a matter of precedent, I have to go over
Yes.
on that one. But I'm going to turn my attention back to that Suns Thunder game and kind of employ, the same logic that I talked about with the last question with OKC covering. I think this game goes under 218.5, and it's because I just think there's going to be a short-term adjustment period for Phoenix playing without Chris Paul. I mean, it's a massive, massive adjustment for especially how many minutes he was playing over the last few weeks. Like early in the season, the Suns were blowing everybody out. Chris Paul was playing like 28 to 30 minutes a lot of nights, not playing late into the fourth quarter. But, during this latest, I think, 8-game winning streak heading into the break, and even before that, he was routinely in the 35 to 40-minute range, which for Chris Paul is not something we've seen in recent years. So, that's just a ton of production to replace. We already talked about Campaign not being there. I think there's going to be some initial clunkiness with that Phoenix offense. And OKC, yeah, you get SGA back. That's great. Still the worst offense in the league coming out of the break, I should say. They are a top 10 defense. Obviously, the Suns, one of the best defenses in the league. OKC has gone under in 57% of its games this season. There's just a lot to me, I think, pointing toward the under on a number that's probably a couple points too high at 218.5.
All right. Good stuff, guys.
Just do the Matthew
Yeah, I
McConaughey.
did.
All right.
Be a lot cooler if you did. One more block to go here on The Sweat. We're taking a look at the latest NFL offseason headlines when we come back. Final block of the show. We made it.
We did.
Our NFL panel is here. DraftKings contributors Pierce Dietrich and Reed Fowler. Guys, NFL spin move time. So we're putting a sportsbook or DFS spin on the latest NFL offseason headlines. So Aaron Rodgers went full Aaron Rodgers with some strange comments about his future this week, but basically he was non-committal on if or who he'll be playing for next season. Early Thursday morning, ESPN's Diana Rossini reported that a decision could come soon, and there are multiple teams with trade offers on the table.
Oh.
Now, the guy who might be impacted the most by this is his Green Bay buddy, Davonte Adams. Adams said this week there have been no discussions between him and the Packers, but the window to franchise tag players opened on Tuesday. So do the Packers need to tag Adams to have any shot at retaining Rodgers, Pierce?
Don't do it. Do not franchise tag him. This kind of acrimonious move typically is just the beginning of the end. The last thing you want to do is turn Davonte Adams into a diva wide receiver. You got to find a way to sign him, and you've got to find a way to get Aaron Rodgers back. I know the grass is always greener, and you think of, what could happen or what are the moves that we could make. Green Bay's been very fortunate over the last 30 years in that they've only had 2 quarterbacks. What other team in the history of the NFL has had that kind of blessing? They have no idea what kind of trouble will lie ahead if they continue to try to make some sort of drastic move or to gamble. They don't know. Green Bay fans, the organization doesn't know what hard times are. You got to keep him. They are very close. I know the rebuild sounds nice, but there's no guarantee that the rebuild will work. We're 1 game away. This is a Super Bowl caliber team. Why mess with this? Find the money, make them happy.
Reed, remember when we thought Aaron Rodgers might be the next host of Jeopardy, and now we're still talking about this again?
He was terrible on Jeopardy. He was absolutely terrible. I'll say it. He was just boring.
Okay.
What a snooze.
Reed, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm so happy, though, it is Steve Jobs season for you, Jesse.
It's always Steve Jobs season, baby.
Yeah,
It's a moo-moo.
I feel
It's
severely
incredible.
underdressed. We got Steve Jobs, and we got Pierce here with a suit and tie, dressed to the nines. Emerson's in a collared shirt. Everything is upside down. And so is this. Pierce is absolutely right. You need to keep him, because if you take a look at what the Packers have done, not only had they only had 2 quarterbacks for the last 2 decades, Hall of Fame, Super Bowl caliber quarterback, winning quarterbacks, they had one of the best wide receivers, receiving cores in their stable for the last 10 years. You had Jordy Nelson, you had Randall Cobb when he was good, and now you got Davonte Adams, who was first or top 3 in every major statistical category for wide receivers. Pierce is absolutely right. Find the money. Sign him for 4 years, close to $70 million. Make him the most expensive, highest paid wide receiver, because that is the only way. That is the only way you're keeping Aaron Rodgers. Because if he's gone, if they're becoming less and less inclined to sign a guy like Davonte Adams, even if Rodgers is gone, who do you think Jordan Love's going to pass to if Davonte Adams is gone? You can't pass to A.J. Dillon. You can't pass to Aaron Jones. You can't pass to those guys as much as you want to win games. So absolutely keep them.
All right, dudes. Speaking of elite wide receivers here, let's talk about Elijah Moore and the Jets. This week on Twitter, Chad Ochocinco chiming in on how New York should be using their young receivers, saying, you want success? Use Elijah Moore the same way the Rams use Kupp. You have a very good quarterback in Zachary Wilson. What do you guys think about Elijah Moore's 2022 outlook here? Is Ochocinco onto something, Reed?
I just appreciate that, we on the sweater taking our lead from Ochocinco.
Yeah.
I love that. It's
quiet time of year.
He's a content machine, man. And the Zachary Wilson, look, he was historically bad. Zachary Wilson was. You can call him Zachary, whatever you want to call him. You can call him bad, because that's what he was. And yet Elijah Moore was one of the only shining parts of that system, right? I mean, yes, they had some good running backs, but Elijah Moore was the best part of that offense for a long time. He had close to an 81 passer rating when targeted, 12.5 yards per reception. And what he was doing towards the end of the season, with the last 6 games, he averaged 6 receptions, close to 80 yards on 70% of the snaps, right? This guy wasn't playing a full complement of snaps because Robert Saleh or whomever wanted to keep him, right? Maybe not necessarily put him at full bore. This is the type of receiver that we're going to see in the NFL moving forward, right? The quote-unquote Deebo Samuel light, where this guy was also averaging 12.5 yards per carry as well. He's a top 20 wide receiver in Dynasty. I think in redrafts, you got to go after someone like this. And yeah, I expect a big game, because if you Like, amortize his production out over the last 6 games to a full season. That's over 1,000 yards receiving for a guy in close to 7 to 10 touchdowns, Pierce, of someone who has a lot of talent.
Pierce, is Ocho Cinco onto something here? Is using Elijah Moore like Cooper Kupp the key to unlocking the Jets' offense?
I swear the producers just put a bunch of random names and hats and then pulled out Elijah Moore and Ocho Cinco.
Just so you know, Matt Durgan, Slate's behind the scenes, just got in our ear and said, you are correct. That's exactly how the producers do it.
Yeah, Ocho probably should have been ratioed for this. Reed's right. Elijah Moore is good, and the sky is the limit. We saw him flash some brilliance towards the end of last season before he got injured, but that injury, we could be back to square one. I know that they were intentionally limiting what he was going to do, but who knows what he's going to look like coming off the injury at the beginning of next season. But the real reason he deserves to be ratioed is Ocho Cinco thinking Zach Wilson is a good quarterback. Maybe he sees something that we didn't. I know that Wilson was really bad, and a lot of that was because his offensive line was absolutely abysmal. He had a 30.6 pressure rate. The adjusted sack rate was near the bottom of the league. And it wasn't like he was a rookie that was holding the ball too long. He had 2.4 pocket time, so that wasn't the case. It was just terrible blocking. Maybe if they improve that offensive line, but everyone needs to improve their offensive line. I don't see how the Jets are going to miraculously fix that. But if they did, yeah, Wilson would play better, and that would definitely help out Elijah Moore. But season long, career-wise, it's going to be rough going for a while for Elijah Moore if they can't get any blocking on the offensive line. Yeah, they can use him in versatile ways, but you also have to use him as a regular receiver too, and you got to protect your quarterback.
All right, some social media detective work leads us to our next question. People have noticed Russell Wilson changed his Twitter profile pic from one of him in a Seahawks uniform to one from his days as a prep school player in Virginia.
Oh.
Russ is a Virginia native and played 3 years at NC State before landing in Wisconsin and eventually being drafted by Seattle. So some have been speculating a DMV homecoming for the Seahawks quarterback if he were to leave.
It's your neck of the woods.
Yeah, it is. I'm a Virginia girl, too. Right now on DK Sportsbook, Wilson is plus 2,500 to end up with the Commanders. Like, should Washington be very interested in trying to pry Russ out of Seattle? And how do you feel about these odds, Reed?
Well, I think Pierce is this what Pierce said yesterday on the show? Did you say Wilson to the Commanders? You said someone to the Commanders.
Shouldn't go to the Commanders.
Wrong.
I don't think it works. I mean, good. It'd be great for Wilson. Wilson does need a change of scenery, I suppose, and maybe that's what he's alluding to with his social media photo change. I mean, I guess that settles it. He's leaving Seattle, but he's going to go from a team that he has weapons at to a team where, I mean, Washington's not terrible. They've got a good receiver, but it's definitely a downgrade weapons-wise, and the offensive line's not going to get better. And it doesn't change the fact that he's an athletic quarterback that has gotten old. This is not a new story. We've seen this with all of the quarterbacks that lean on their athleticism. When that disappears, they fall apart. Tom Brady was able to continue to put up good numbers because he's a pocket passer. You block for him, you give him weapons, he could have another 5 or 6 more good seasons. But Wilson's a guy that scrambles and makes magic happen, and he wasn't making the magic happen last season. In his defense, he wasn't throwing turnovers, but he's throwing a lot of incomplete passes. If you don't move the sticks, then you don't win games. If I'm the Commanders, I'd rather just develop Heineke. I'd rather go out and get Mitchell Trubisky. There's not a lot of upside there, but you get those game managers, you have a decent defense, you've got enough weapons that you could win the division. Why would you trade your future or get rid of resources for Russell Wilson, which really just seems like a lateral move? I don't think that I don't think he's going anywhere, really. He can change his picture all he wants. No one wants him.
All right, Reed, real quick, this was plus 2,500 yesterday. Now it's plus 1,800.
Dude, that's a big move.
Yeah, this is a move that all of these quarterbacks are doing, right? They take all of the social media posts down. It's a move that his team and Kyler Murray's team wants to do to get more money. Look, I think the Commanders go after Kenny Pickett in the draft or Jimmy G, to be honest. I don't think they go after a guy like Russell Wilson where you got to pay a bounty for. I think he goes to Philly. And Philly does something where what we see like the Rams did, right? It's sort of a similar, like in terms of age, not in terms of talent and type of quarterback like Pierce alluded to, but they picked up all of these draft picks from Indy for Wentz. And if they give that to Seattle, it's basically a wash. It's basically Wentz for Russell Wilson. And then you have a similar type of style of quarterback and what they probably want to do in Philly, and they can make a run. So I think he goes to Philly rather than the Commanders, or he stays put.
All right, good stuff. Enjoyed talking to you guys. Enjoyed talking to all our guests today. Enjoyed talking to you as well.
All right, Madden starts at noon. The slate is at 5 o'clock. We'll see you tomorrow.